Good morning, Internet. It is March 20th, 2019, and just by being here this morning, you are committing to improving yourself as a parent, and making the world a better place. We all want to see macro change, but the best way to make macro change happen is at the grassroots level. And there is no level more personal, more important than the way we teach our children. And I do think it's remarkable that politicians claim to care about our society, that they want America to be a better place, that they want to do everything they can to better the future for our children. Yet we live in a society in which the overwhelming majority, and keep in mind, people in America don't agree on anything, but the overwhelming majority of Americans agree that the American education system is broken. America is falling behind in math and science and literature, and there's no denying that if you just talk to any 18-year-old, that young children are leaving high school without the faintest idea of how to operate in the real world. They can't balance a checkbook, they can't build anything with their hands, they can't start a business. And this is the product of 12 years of schooling, 10 months a year, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, 45 minutes of class plus homework. Something is wrong. It is broken. This should be the number one topic in the public conversation, yet it's something that barely gets spoken about. The teachers' unions have an absurd amount of power, and neither side of the political aisle has the junction to take on the unions and do what is right to make sure that our children are properly educated. So I posted this meme on Classical Learner today. See if it comes up right. There you go. And it says, shouldn't your education be yours? Because I was sitting around thinking the other day, they say go to school for your education. But what else is yours that you have no control over? Because students go to school and they're told where to be, where to sit, not even just the classroom, but they're told what seat to sit in. And they're told what assignment to do. If they have to go to the bathroom, they have to raise their hand. They can't work on something the teacher doesn't want them to work on. So it doesn't sound like it's your education. It sounds like it's the school's education. The work is completely out of context, which is why we always hear, but when am I ever going to use this? You're not. But this is boring. It is. And is it any wonder that children aren't interested in school by the time they get to middle school? The work is completely pointless. It's not part of anything. It's completely out of context. You work on an assignment for 45 minutes, and after that 45 minutes, you might as well take the assignment, take your piece of paper, crumple it up, throw it on the garbage, and light that garbage on fire. So when they say you go to school for your education, what they really mean is you go to school for the school's education. And of course, who runs the school? Well, those are the big, powerful oligarchs at the top of society. I know many people who follow this channel appreciate history. Well, if you look up something called the Reece Committee, and the final report done by Norman Dodd. The Reece Committee took place in the 1950s. Norman Dodd had concluded that in the early 1900s, around 1910, the big tax-exempt foundations, the big oligarchs who were said to have been reined in by Teddy Roosevelt, the Rockefellers, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegies, they all got together and had meetings. And what they discussed at the meetings was essentially how to take over the United States of America. And they realized that if you want to take over a country, you have to control the public mind. So what did they do? They discussed how to take control of the American education system. And Norman Dodd actually was granted access to their private archives, and that's how he figured this out. And what these big tax-exempt foundations did was they studied different education systems all throughout the world, And they decided that the Prussian education system would be the best. Now, the Prussian education system had been created in Prussia after Prussia lost wars to Napoleon. Their soldiers literally turned around and ran away. So the Prussian government, what did they do? They brought in experts to develop an education system that would make the students, after just a couple of generations, completely subservient to authority. And that is the education system that is implemented not just in the United States of America today, but all around the world. So if you track the history of this stuff, it is not an accident. You say, but how did the big tax-exempt foundations do that? Well, there's the obvious, the lobbying, the buying of politicians, the promoting of teachers' unions designed to harm the education system, not help the student. And there was the immediate way in which it was done, and it did not take long at all. All the Rockefeller Foundation did was take out public notes, put every school on notice that if they would implement the education system that the Rockefeller Foundation wanted them to implement, well, there would be a nice, tiny, but influential $10,000 grant waiting for them. Without any government intervention, before long, most of the schools in America had already developed this Prussian education system. If you want to learn more about this history, read the work of John Taylor Gatto. Or, if you really want to have a good day, Google Norman Dodd speaking about the tax-exempt foundations. That'll really blow your mind. Maybe I'll post that on Classical Learner today. As you saw, I posted my meme on Classical Learner on Facebook. Please follow that link. I will post it shortly in the comments on the right side. But, here it is. But another thing that I'm posting is a 3-minute interview by John Taylor Gatto. And in that interview, John Taylor Gatto talks about, let me just post that link to the Facebook page. There you go. Also, if you could please follow Classical Learner on YouTube. That is my other YouTube channel. I haven't posted there yet, but over time that will become my primary posting channel. So if you're going to want to continue watching my videos, which I certainly hope you do, I hope you get value from them, that's the point, then you're going to want to follow Classical Learner. So in the video, John Taylor Gatto, the godfather of modern education and homeschooling, discusses this little book right here, The Lost Tools of Learning by Dorothy Sayers. Now, The Lost Tools of Learning, you say it isn't much of a book. It's paper thin. It's 30-something pages. And Dorothy Sayers wasn't an educator. And an interesting note, if I could read just the back of the book, the little blurb, it says, that I, whose experience of teaching is extremely limited, should presume to discuss education is a matter surely that calls for no apology. It is the kind of behavior to which the present climate of opinion is wholly favorable. Bishops air their opinions about economics, biologists about metaphysics, inorganic chemists about theology. The most irrelevant people are appointed to highly technical ministries, and plain blunt men write to the papers to say that Epstein and Picasso do not know how to draw. Up to a certain point, and provided that the criticisms are made with reasonable modesty, these activities are commendable. Too much specialization, which is what the school system does, is not a good thing. There is also one excellent reason why the veriest amateur may feel entitled to have an opinion about education. This is you. For if we are not all professional teachers, that is me, we have all, at some time or other, been taught. Even if we learnt nothing, perhaps in particular if we learnt nothing, our contribution to the discussion may have potential value. So you see what she said there. If you learned nothing, that may mean your value to the discussion is even greater. What was your experience in the public education system? Did you feel that when you were 18 years old, you left school as a capable young adult who had a wide variety of skills so that you can choose your own path in life. That is why the education system is broken, not because America's falling math and science scores, although you would think if that's the purpose of the school system, the scores would be better. So in the Lost Tools of Learning, which I strongly recommend if you have children, like I said, 30-something pages, very easy. Book's probably, I don't remember how much it costs. It's probably $20. But in the Lost Tools of Learning, Dorothy Sayers talks about the way in which children used to be educated. And she talks about the trivium and the quadrivium of education, something that is strongly worth looking into. But the trivium is comprised of 3 parts: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So grammar is focused around writing. It is not just commas, but it is the root of having debates. If anyone who has been on a debate team at Princeton or Harvard in the Ivy League would tell you that the most important thing you can do at the onset of any debate is to properly define your term, just as I'm defining grammar right now. So grammar means to define your term and define your terms and your writing abilities. Logic. Logic is the process of having an internal dialectic, of making sure there are no contradictory thoughts within your thought process and within your writing. Simple enough for most of us that use logic. It's how we try to interpret the world. Of course, many of us experience, in fact, all of us experience some degree or another of cognitive dissonance, and we have to use logic to the best of our abilities to make sure that there are no contradictions within our thought process so that we can better understand the world. And the third arm of the trivium is rhetoric, the ability to articulate your thoughts and your knowledge to other people, because knowledge does not become wisdom until it can be transferred from one person to another. I myself am always working on that. I hope I am demonstrating how to turn knowledge into wisdom with this podcast. Of course, you might not be getting it, in which case my rhetorical skills certainly do need fine-tuning. But essentially, grammar, logic, and rhetoric are the tools of reading, understanding, putting what you understand on paper, writing, and then properly articulating what you understand to another person so that you could transfer that knowledge and it could become wisdom. Now, think about this in the context of the podcast that I've done over just the last few days. I talked about 2 children. On the one hand, we have child A. Child A is your typical public school child. They go to school and let's say they learn about history. And they learn about history via textbook. So they get their information in the textbook. For the next 3 weeks, they're going to be learning chapters 1 through 7, and the teacher's going to be lecturing them about information that they need to know. And essentially what's happening is they're being taught to memorize information that comes from authority, and usually they are taking a multiple choice test at the end of that 3-week period to see if they properly memorized the alleged truth that came from the textbook, that came from authority. What are they learning? They're learning memorization. They're learning truth comes from authority. Take child B. Child B is encouraged to learn about what child B wants to learn about. So you say, what do you want to learn about in history? They say the Civil War. You say, okay, why don't you read a general book regarding the Civil War? They read that general book. You say, okay, now who are you interested in? You say Ulysses S. Grant. And you have them read primary documents, whether that be, I don't know if he wrote a book, but whether that be a book or his direct communications. And then after they read that information, you have them write papers. And in that paper, they articulate what they learned about Ulysses S. Grant, and they're using their critical thinking skills. And then after they write the paper, you have them give a presentation to your family, extended family, maybe you have friends over, and they're working on their public speaking skills. And then you use the Socratic method to question their logic. and make the child think about their logic. And what this is essentially doing is working on a child's skills of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Their ability to problem solve, think critically, put their thoughts on paper, and properly articulate their thoughts to other people. Which skills do you think will serve a child better when they are grown up and they're a CEO and they're in a big boardroom and they're making their presentation and they have to convince people as to why their strategy, their business strategy, their method is better than someone else's? Is it the child who memorized that information and worked on a multiple choice test? Or is it the child who has been taught grammar, logic, and rhetoric, that has been asked to study primary documents themselves, formulate, articulate logical arguments both on paper and using the spoken word? Well, of course, it is the child that's been taught to think critically that is going to be more successful in the world. So this is The Lost Tools of Learning by Dorothy Sayers. I strongly recommend it. I appreciate you tuning in today. I didn't want to take up too much of your time. I just wanted to point out this piece of literature because it really is phenomenal. If you could please follow Classical Learner on Facebook, I'd greatly appreciate that. And also Classical Learner on YouTube. If you support the work that I'm doing, you can support me financially at www.patreon.com. As always, thank you for tuning in. Power to the individual, and long live liberty.